So now we should have a really good idea what the different types of brokerage relationships are, different types of agency relationships, and now we want to talk about the different types of agency agreements. Because to become a client, then you have to sign a written agreement, an agency agreement. And there are different types of agreements. And that's what we're getting ready to look into right now. So make sure you understand them. Make sure you can differentiate from one from another, because they do mean slightly different things here. So let's take a look at the different options you have in terms of the type of agreement you may want to enter into. The first one is what we call the open listing agreement. And basically, this is pretty simple. Well, all of them are simple, honestly, but if you decide to enter into an open listing agreement, and by the way, we're talking about the types of listing agreement that create a seller agency. Okay, we'll talk about buyers here in a little bit. But right now, just the listings. But if you do an open listing, basically what that means to the seller is this. They can hire as many agents as they choose to sell their home. They're not limited to just one. They can hire as many as they want to hire. And they also reserve the right to find the buyer on their own without any assistance from an agent. And if they can do that, then they do not have to pay any commission at all. Okay? Now, with an open listing, the only way you would get paid if you decided to do this is if you find the buyer for the seller. If another agent finds the buyer, you don't get paid. Okay? You only get paid a commission if you find the buyer, but keep in mind the seller still retains the right to find the buyer themselves and not have to pay any commission at all. So that's the open listing. Obviously, not very many agents probably choose this one, although it is used under certain circumstances. But now we look at what we call the exclusive agreements, or the exclusive listing agreement. Here's where you better be careful, because there's two types of exclusive agreements, and this is where you don't want to get these two confused. Now, the term exclusive should suggest to you only one, because it's exclusive. So if you enter into a listing agreement, an exclusive agreement with the seller, that means, seller, you can only hire one agent. You cannot hire more than one. Okay, but with the exclusive agency, as long as an agent brings a buyer that buys the house to the seller, you still have to pay the commission. Okay, whether it be you as the one that actually listed the property or any other agent, they still would have to pay the commission. But they still reserve the right under this agreement to find the buyer on their own, and they would not have to pay any real estate commissions at all. Okay, so it's a little bit better than the open listing, because they can only hire one agent, and if an agent sells the house, then the seller will pay the commission. The big difference is they could still find the buyer themselves and not have to pay the commission. Again, that's the exclusive agency listing. Now, the other exclusive agreement is called the exclusive right to sell. And the way I kind of explain it to sellers is this way, which obviously this is the one that I like to use. That's not to suggest one you should or shouldn't use, but I like this agreement. And the way I explain it to seller is this. Seller, if you sell your house after signing this agreement, I get paid. Is there anything we don't understand about that? I like that idea. Because basically means, obviously they can only hire one agent, and seller, if you sell the house, regardless of who finds the buyer, then seller, you have to pay the commission. So the seller does not have the right to find the buyer on their own and try to sell it without you and whatnot. If they sell that house, regardless of who finds the buyer under this agreement, the seller, you have to pay the commission. Okay? So just be careful you don't confuse exclusive agency listing with the exclusive right to sell listing. Okay? Now, one other type of listing agreement is called the net listing. Okay? Well, the net listing, now I will tell you, this type of listing agreement is not legal in many states. Now, some states allow it. So, and again, we'll get into your state-specific portion of the course. We'll find out for sure what your state allows. But I can tell you, my state, which happens to be South Carolina, this is not legal. Net listings are not legal in South Carolina. But the way it would work is this. Whether it's legal in your state or not, you still need to know what it is because they could ask you about it. All right? Just because there are many states that allow it. But basically, the seller would tell their agent, I have to have $300,000 out of this sale. Or some other number. But basically, the seller just tells the agent how much they have to get out of the sale. So when we get through and we walk away from the closing table, in this example, the seller's saying, I have to walk away with $300,000. But agent, you can keep anything over that amount that you sell it for. So if you sell it for $350,000, then you can keep the $50,000 in commission as long as I get my $300,000. That's considered or called a net listing. There are some potentially some contract law issues with a net listing. We'll talk more about those when we get into contracts and stuff, but that's why it's not legal, this type of agreement, in many states. But yet there's still a lot of states that will allow it. So you still have to know what a net listing is. Okay. All right. So those were the listing agreements. So now we take a look at the different options you have for buyers. The buyer agency agreements. And for what it's worth, it works pretty much the exact same way with the seller in the listing agreements. For example, you've got the open buyer representation agreement. And that works just like the open listing agreement does with the seller. Real quick review. If it's an open buyer agreement, that means the buyer can hire as many agents as they want to hire to help them find a house. But they're only going to be liable for commission or compensation to the one agent that actually found the house that they wind up buying. Okay? Obviously, under this agreement, again, the buyer retains the right to find the house on their own without the agent's assistance, and would not be responsible for any commission at all. Okay? So that's the open buyer agreement. And then again, just like the listing side with the seller, there's two types of exclusive agreements for buyers. Same as the seller. One, again, is the exclusive agency buyer agreement. And again, because it's exclusive, what does that mean? They can only hire one agent. With the open agreement, they can hire as many as they want. Exclusive, they can only hire one agent. And under this type, the exclusive agency, if the agent finds the house for the buyer, then the agents do a commission. But the buyer still retains the right to find the house on their own and not have to pay a commission at all, or not be responsible for a commission. But if we go with the exclusive right to purchase, which again is the one I like to use when I'm working with buyers, again, and I explain this to buyers pretty much the same way I explained it to the seller. buyer, by signing this agreement, if you buy a house, I get paid. Okay? It doesn't matter whether I find it or you find it or mama finds it. It don't matter who finds the house. You buy a house, I get paid. And basically what I want them to understand here is that under this agreement, you're going to have to pay me if you buy a house. Same thing with the exclusive right to sell with the seller. I'm not trying to be short with them, saying you got to pay me no matter what. The point I'm trying to make is this. Because you do have to pay me under this agreement, let me do my job. Let me do the work. Don't try to go out and do something on your own. You're paying me. Let me handle it. It's my job. I can do it. Right? I have the background. I have the knowledge. I have the experience. I can help you get a better deal if you'll let me do my job. But if you decide to go out there and do it on your own, which obviously there's nothing I can do to stop them, just understand you still have to pay me. Okay? So anyway, y'all, that's the exclusive right. But then, occasionally you may wind up representing both the buyer and the seller. And if you recall from previous instruction, that's what we call dual agency. And if you're going to get involved or work with both buyer and seller in a dual agency relationship, obviously you got to disclose that to both parties, right? Remember we talked about you must disclose you are limited on how much you can do for either party under dual agency. But as long as you disclose everything to them, you got to disclose to the buyer who the seller is and what your relationship with that seller is. But then you got to disclose to the buyer who is the seller and what their relationship, and vice versa. You just got to make sure everything is fully disclosed, and as long as all parties are okay with it, then they would sign the dual agency agreement. And then you could commence working with both parties. I will tell you where a lot of times agents get in trouble is they begin basically negotiating and basically working with both parties before they get the the dual agency agreement signed. I'm telling you, that will get you in trouble. You don't get that dual agency agreement signed, and you start helping or working on either side there, you're going to have a problem. Okay? All right. Well, what happens if buyer or seller says no to dual agency? Well, then that means you're not representing both. Okay? That's the first thing it means. Dual agency is not going to be an option. But remember, there is a potential alternative to dual agency, and that's called designated agency, which would also require a written agreement if they want to do this. But remember, the way that would work is this. Now, obviously, you got to explain this to them that obviously the reason they would say no, or one of the parties would say no to dual agency, is because they don't feel like that you could represent both them and the other party fairly. And there could be some argument to that. But anyway, well then let's say buyer refuses dual agency, then I might say, well, buyer, how could we maybe do this? I could get my broker in charge to actually designate a different licensee other than myself, obviously someone that also works in our same office, but that licensee will work for you, represent you, and I will continue to work with the seller. Would that be an option for you? Because under designated agency, you're still getting exclusive representation, because each buyer and seller they both have their own licensee or subagent that's representing their best interest, right? So it's not just one licensee trying to get the best deal for both sides. You now have two licensees, one with each party. So, y'all, look, designated agency is an alternative to dual agency, and I'm telling you, you need to remember this. It's an alternative that would offer exclusive representation for both buyer and seller. Y'all, it's exclusive because they each have their own subagent or licensee that's going to be representing them throughout the process. Now, it's also important to remember, y'all, designated agency is still dual agency. Well, why is it still dual agency if they each have their own subagent or licensee working for them? Because the broker in charge remains the dual agent. Okay? Now, each party does have their own licensee, but both those licensees work for the same broker in charge. Okay? All right. So, y'all, hopefully that makes sense. But again, before you can do any of these or enter into any of these relationships, you have to have written agreements. You got to have the buyer agreement with the buyer, a listing agreement with the seller, and then you can enter into either dual or designated agency agreements to work with both of them. Okay. When it comes to this dual and designated agent, we kind of touched on it, but is that a conflict of interest? And I will tell you, absolutely it is. Especially with dual agency. Designated agency does offer some of that exclusive representation, so that helps a lot for sure. But dual agency is a conflict of interest. The law even says dual agency is a conflict of interest. However, as long as it's fully disclosed to both parties and both parties understand what they're doing and they're okay with it, then they sign the dual agency agreement acknowledging that they're okay with it, and then you're allowed to work with both parties. Okay? But those are your different types of agency agreements.